This is Dr. Jacob Egbert with the Escape the Drift podcast. And today's topic is emotional responsibility. And I'm going to tackle this topic from a position of not being an expert necessarily. I'm not a licensed psychologist or clinical therapist by any means. And so in the realm of emotion, I am not a licensed or clinical expert. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't have significant experience and observation as well as education in the area of emotional responsibility. So responsibility specifically is an area that I feel comfortable speaking. Now, let me dive into this. I heard this quote recently, maybe within the last year, and it was that the number one skill to develop in personal development is emotional regulation. So I agree with that on the outset, on the surface. I think that's a really great focus in the world of personal responsibility / personal development. And emotional regulation being one of the most important tools, this is going to be the topic of what we discuss today. So emotional regulation and emotional responsibility. I'm going to be using those interchangeably at times, and I will designate what I mean by each, and you'll see how the overlap is appropriate. So, to begin with, emotional responsibility is the topic, and that is how I'm going to refer to it from my perspective. Now, emotional regulation is very similar in that your responsibility is to regulate your emotion. So they come at the same task with two different words, essentially describing the same outcome, being responsible for regulating emotion. So let me get into this. Now, emotion, as we're all familiar, is a pretty common part of being human. We all have emotion. So some basic emotions: joy, fear, sadness, elation or happiness, disgust, anger. These are some pretty basics. And there are, I would say, each of these has a spectrum within that particular emotion. So for example, anger may begin with frustration. So frustration becomes anger, which then becomes rage. Now, all three of these as emotions, unregulated, can be somewhat damaging to those around us, if not ourselves. And this is where we'll get some clarity on the topic of emotional responsibility being one of the best tools or skills to develop in personal development pursuits. So I use anger to begin with because it is so obvious, and I want to get into some of the others later. But first, let's talk about anger. What does that arise from? So like I said here in a second ago, frustration, anger, rage. And there's like an escalation of this emotion that's pretty core or basic that becomes each of these with increased intensity. And all of these begin from the basic perspective of this isn't going the way I think it should, or it isn't going my way. It isn't going my way. When something isn't going your way, the way you think it should be, you might be a little miffed or perturbed, which leads to frustration, and then can quickly escalate into anger. And of course, anger unchecked, rage. And rage is a very dangerous emotion because it tips into some of your more base, rudimentary actions, and therefore could be quite violent or destructive. All of which, as I said, begin with, this isn't going my way. It's a fit. It's a tantrum. This is a very juvenile or primal meaning origin or beginning of the young version of a human. And over time with development, the tool of regulation becomes very important. Okay, so that's clear. That emotion, anger. Let's talk about some other emotions to get more context for this topic as we get into some of the more practical approaches. So there's the emotion of fear. Now, fear begins with apprehension. And apprehension is that feeling of I don't know, this isn't quite comfortable for me. I might be at risk in some way, which then leads to fear. This is probably really bad, and I need to be very wary of this particular circumstance or scenario, which then leads to terror, which is, again, a completely dysregulated emotion that can have panic level thrashing and very abrupt or, like I said, panicked reaction, which can be dangerous to you or those around you if dysregulated or not used appropriately. So again, you can see there's an escalation of emotion within this particular area: apprehension, fear, terror. And there, of course, can be other words used to describe the spectrum here, but I think those are appropriate. Then you may have contentment, joy, and elation. Again, an escalation or an intensifying of that particular emotion. Contentment, joy, elation. Now, that doesn't strike me as particularly dangerous necessarily. And I think that not all emotion expressed can have negative feelings or negative output, negative impact. Yet, you can see that there is a spectrum there, and is an intensification or escalation of the particular emotion. Okay, cool. Some other emotions. Disgust. Disgust is a pretty, I guess you could say, important emotion in certain circumstances. I think it was developed to protect humans from dangerous, I guess you could say, interactions or other things that are just dangerous for the body. For example, the reaction of disgust to infection, for example, the smells that result in a disgust feeling are going to keep you away from those things that may lead to dangerous outcomes. You're not going to eat the rotten food because of the disgust reflex, which is an emotion. Now, other emotions that live within, other areas of this particular emotion that can protect you get a little bit more disgusting, but that would be in the world of like incest and other things that give you that like yuck feeling, and maybe even underage interactions. It is disgusting as you just imagine anything that may have a negative impact on you or your culture. So very important emotion. Now, where that can be dysregulated or used inappropriately would be to assign or somehow experience the disgust in ways that is not appropriate. Racism, for example, can have an experience of disgust, a dehumanization of an other. So racism or any other sort of categorization of a different group of humans, an out-group, in-group scenario. Now, whether that has some potential benefit evolutionarily or in earlier scenarios or tribes, that's for other scholars to dive into. But essentially, I'm just identifying that disgust dysregulated can have some pretty negative impact on those around you. Okay. So context, I think, is pretty clear. We have emotions that have intensification, and that dysregulation can be somewhat damaging or dangerous to yourself or those around you. Clear. Okay. Now, what I want to get into today is a little bit more practical. Now, when I started this, of course, I said the word responsibility, and I've been using the term regulation, which, again, interchangeable, but slightly different. Now, what I want to get into with the word responsibility is this. the term that I like to use, or the phrase that I've used often, is this: there is what's so and what I can do. Now, I came up with this years ago as a mantra, and I was looking for a mantra for meditation. So I'd sit in my meditation, and I was trying to think of something powerful that I could speak over and over that had a lot of impact on how I be in the world. And this is what I came up with. There's what's so and what I can do. There's what's so and what I can do. And I would repeat this regularly, or over and over, repeatedly, to get me into the mindset of responsibility. And this is a very powerful perspective for me, in that I know what this means. There is what's so, reality. There is the reality around me. There is what's so, and there is what I can do. What actions can I take? And that is responsibility. So how do we use this, what's so, and what I can do, in context of emotion? Now, emotion gets in the way. I'm just going to say that. It gets in the way of this particular phrase, and therefore there needs to be a separateness. Anytime you take an action, ideally, you do this without emotion. Similar to all those other emotions that we discussed, where the intensification or the exaggeration of that particular emotion can lead to some very dangerous outcomes: violence, discrimination and prejudice against others, or let's talk about sadness. Grief is the increase in sadness to the extreme. Grieving can lead to depression and inert states, like where you don't do anything. You can become so sad and grieving that you stop thriving. So the actions cease, essentially. So the action is an inaction. So that's just another example of a dysregulated emotion that can lead to negative outcome. Okay. So what's so and what I can do? Well, feelings and emotion are friends, we'll say. Maybe not exactly the same, but pretty close. So I can feel feelings of sadness. I can feel feelings of grief. I can feel feelings of anger. So essentially, the feelings of emotion are very similar. Now, the term emotion does have a preceding meaning to result in action or motion or motive. Emotion, it emotes. It essentially drives you to be or do certain things. So when you're angry, you're being angry. Now, you can feel anger, and you can be anger/angry. And there's a difference there. The emotion of being angry versus feeling anger, that's the nuance, I believe, the difference between the two. So you can be one way and you can feel one way. So responsibility comes when you identify that you feel feelings, and then you choose to do something outside of that feeling. So for example, I come home from work, one of my kids has spilled something all over the counter that's spilled onto the floor. Now, immediately I have a reaction, and that could be frustration or anger. That's the feeling, because this is not going my way. I think this should not have happened. My perspective does not match what is so. Now, the anger comes with, this isn't the way it should be. That's a story. That's something that I created, I generated based on what's so. So I could be in my emotion. I could be angry. And in being angry, I might yell. I might throw something. I might hit a child. I personally would not do this, but I'm just giving you an example. So there's a feeling of anger or frustration. This is not the way it should be. Now, the practical approach here with emotional responsibility, having regulated that emotion, I see what's so. There's stuff on the counter and the floor. And then there's what I can do. I could yell. I could rage. I could calmly say, hey guys, this mess is pretty big. Can we clean it up? I'll help you. I could laugh. I could choose joviality, is that a word? Jovial behavior, and make light of the situation. I could comfort them as they may have their own apprehension, which could escalate to fear. And on the other side of anger or rage could result in terror. And you can see how these emotions escalate based on circumstance. Now, I bring this up in this context because there is that moment where the feeling arises, this should not be this way. I feel frustrated or maybe angry. That's what's so. I feel feelings. And what I can do, and all those things that I listed. And that's the magic of having emotional regulation, being able to regulate the emotion and de-escalate yourself. You know, there's a lot of techniques to de-escalate or bring down that intensity through reframing. So if you're quick, and this is an interesting part of being human, especially an intelligent human, is you have the ability to quickly regulate. You can come in and you can have that welling up of feelings, recognize it, survey the room, see all the players, see the scenario, make quick decisions. If I yell and rage, that's going to do damage to these little humans. The outcome will be no different. The cleanup has to happen. Do I want to damage the relationship I have with these children for no benefit, really? It's just negative. Or do I choose to protect them because I see in their eyes that they're a little bit like caught off guard, like this just happened, you just walked in, I don't know what to do, I've never cleaned up a mess this big, and I have the opportunity to just be compassionate. And so with that quick regulation, which I've learned as a development tool, I can come in and say, wow, this is a mess. What should we do? Put it over there and be like, you guys want to help me clean it up? Can I help you? What do you want to do? And immediately that you can see them relax, like, we're not going to be in trouble for this. And then I can even be like, that was a pretty good mess, and make light of it and joke a little bit, and then they relax even further. And surprisingly, they'll be much more willing, not surprisingly, much more willing to help clean up because they feel safe. Cool. So emotional regulation as a choice of what's so and what I can do. And I choose to do something else in light of my feelings, because I did not become the emotion. Okay. So there are areas of life where we can use this. I think anger is such a great one because that's usually where the most damage is done. Other areas of relationship or interaction with other humans where emotion can be negative or damaging. This one gets a little bit nuanced, and I'm going to do my best to paint the picture in a way that does leave you with a practical perspective and something that you can do, and also observe in others, and then control yet again your own emotion to when you identify it in others. And this is the area of emotional manipulation. So one of the things that I learned a while back, and it's just really stuck with me, and I don't know if I heard a partial quote and then I derived some meaning from it, and however I came to this conclusion, it's been powerful since. And that is this: self-pity is a form of manipulation. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit backstory on how humans behave. So, children, little tiny babies, infants, have one means or mode of communication to get their needs met, and that is through crying. They can only make one noise, and it's largely involuntary. When they are hungry, tired, in pain, have a dirty diaper or discomfort, whatever it is, and they need attention, they need attended to, they cry. And so the parent's role is to respond to the crying and come in and see, what can I do to alleviate this discomfort? change you, feed you, comfort you, whatever it may be. Okay, that's a very effective tool for a young human that hasn't developed communication skills. And as they get older, this, of course, transitions to different means of communication. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and she still uses some crying at times to express herself in ways that she hasn't quite developed the capacity for appropriate communication. So oftentimes she can ask for, hey, I want this. Can you get me that? I'm tired. It's rare that she says that. But occasionally she'll say that, or she says, I have to go to the bathroom or whatever. So she's learned some language skills. And there are times when she's tired and stressed or whatever else, and the emotion still comes out. Or when she really wants something and doesn't know how to manipulate the situation otherwise. So crying, throwing a fit, a tantrum is what we see. And I have older children. I have a 11-year-old who is much more emotionally regulated. Very rarely does he use emotion to communicate his basic needs. He's quite capable of talking quite well, and he can tell me whatever it is that he's feeling. But occasionally he gets into a mode where he doesn't know how to say the things that he's feeling, and the emotion comes out. Okay, he's still learning. I have a 13-year-old similarly, but he's a little better at it. And I have a 17-year-old, and he's even better at it. 19 and a 22-year-old. I have 6 kids. And so each of them, as they've gotten older, I've been able to observe increased capacity for emotional regulation. Now, as a 44-year-old, I have my own emotional regulation skills that I've developed over the years. And occasionally I'll still observe myself using emotion to communicate. Now, I'm not one that gets angry. I used that example earlier, and that's just not a problem that I have. Now, I will note that occasionally I'll use perhaps depression. Like I'm having a bad day and kind of a sulky, I'm not liking this. And it's an emotion that I'm expressing. I'm being emotive. And I'm looking for comfort or reassurance or encouragement. Now, my wife, who is very astute and intuitive, and also doesn't allow me to get away with anything, she doesn't play into that. And so I've been recognizing that, I'm doing that. Let me just communicate how I feel. I feel these feelings, and I would really like it if I could get some encouragement or reassuring. So much more effective. And so getting that emotional dysregulation didn't work. I'm like, okay, cool. There's a great opportunity for me to recognize that and choose different communication styles. Awesome. That's just an example that I've observed in myself. And so I want to get back to the self-pity. Now, going back to the original example I used as a child, crying to get what you want. Well, adults still do that often in different ways. Or they'll threaten with anger to get what they want. If you don't do this, I'm going to get angry. Okay, so you're threatening emotion, which has the potential for escalation into rage and therefore likely some form of violence. And it's a threat, plain and simple. When someone says, you're going to make me angry, they're essentially threatening you with physical violence or some other retaliation. It's a manipulation. Beware. So that's one. But what I want to get into is this self-pity. When people express self-pity, complaining, this is a very sneaky form of manipulation. Now, they're essentially throwing a fit. They're essentially being a toddler on the ground, kicking and screaming and saying, I'm no good. I need you to swoop in and save me. And you know people like this in your life. They're the complainers. They're the look at me, I'm less than you. I'm disadvantaged. I'm a victim. And anytime anyone tells you stories looking to emote from you, to create emotional state in you, hopefully to gain something from you, that's an emotional manipulation, and it is highly irresponsible. So, I'm not going to dive into that too much further. I think it's clear, but I do want to say, whenever you complain to anyone about anything, start to recognize that that is a form of being irresponsible with your emotion. Whatever that emotion is that's connected to the complaint, whether it's sadness or anger or disgust or otherwise. When you complain to another human, you are using emotional manipulation, and it is a dysregulated state. And it's highly inappropriate and irresponsible. So there's a tactic or a practice, and this is what I want to share today. This one's a little bit complicated for those of you that haven't gone through this particular specific training. But essentially it's this. The most responsible way that you can interact with other people when you have feelings is to do this. First of all, ask, can I share something with you? Yes or no? Yes, okay. I feel, let's say, or it's in response to something that occurred. When this happened, when you spoke these words, I felt this, and then explain your feelings. And then, if you can separate this, your feelings, from what you made it mean, that's the next level of responsibility. When you came home and just walked past me, and you just said hi real quick and went into the kitchen and started playing with our daughter, I felt sad. I felt lonely. I felt hurt. Those are all feelings. Those aren't accusations. Those are nothing about her. What I made it mean, this is my meaning, I'm just making it mean this. I made it mean that you don't care about me, that I'm not a priority to you. Now, to be fully responsible, I get that I made it mean that, and that's not actually what's so, unless you tell me that that's what's so. It's just me making it up. So I had these feelings, hurt, sadness, lonely. I made it mean that you don't care, that I'm not your priority. That's it. That's what I wanted to share. Then my partner has the opportunity to say, okay, I got that. I really get that when I walked past you and I just gave you a quick hello, that you had the feeling of being hurt, sad, and lonely. And you made it mean that I didn't care or that I don't prioritize you. Okay, well, let's talk about that. And this is where generosity and compassion come in. Like, I get that you felt that way. I'm not being manipulated by you. You're not putting that on me. You asked my permission to share. Then the partner has the opportunity to say, okay, I got it. What would work better next time? I'm willing to hear other options. And I would say, can I just have like 30 seconds, maybe even half that, 15 seconds of like a hug, a quick look in the eyes and some attention. And then my partner can be like, yeah, okay, I can do that. I will do that from now on. I'll really prioritize that. And I may need reminders from time to time. And I'll be like, okay, cool. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And now I've been acknowledged for the experience that I had, which did not blame, because I was being responsible with my emotion. Now, I could have gone into anger. This isn't the way it should be. You should have come in and given me the attention that I need. And I could have even raged if I was that person. Or I could go into sadness and grief of like, you don't love me, and I could complain. And I could go into a self-pity, which again is like the little baby crying, looking for a manipulation of the other person. So what I want to really highlight here is that you have the opportunity to regulate these emotions, to control them in such a way that when you feel feelings, you get that those feelings are yours. And they are not the responsibility of anyone else. To put them on someone else's manipulation, it's unfair, it's irresponsible, and it does not work. And you know it when other people do it to you. And therefore, be on the lookout for, one, first of all, your own experience and expression of your emotions and how you put them out into the world. Are you being responsible with your emotions? Are you using anger, sadness, disgust, etc., to manipulate others or to use them against someone else? Or are you regulating yourself? And likely there's many different scenarios where you have different reactions and actions and things that you can work on in other areas that you do pretty well. But look for it. Look for it in yourself. And then also look for it in others and get that. Other people may be attempting to manipulate you, and likely they're not conscious of that. So I would recommend that you not throw that back in their face, but maybe just sit back and be like, you know what, I get it. I really get that you feel that way. And just get it and don't say anything. Because really what they're looking for is you to do something without them having to ask for it. If my wife comes home and doesn't say hello to me in the way that I want, and I sulk and whine and complain about it, hoping that she'll come over and say, what's wrong? And I'll be like, you don't love me. And then she's like, no, I do. And that's just fishing for some sort of weird validation. And that's what these people are doing to you. And don't stand for it. Just sit there and be like, okay, I got it. What else? And maybe they'll complain some more, and then you can get it some more if you choose to. And I could go on and on with this, and there's so many other things that we could talk about with this. But essentially, I think the context of emotion responsibility has been put out there. Those people that have this power to emotionally regulate are the ones that succeed in life, in relationship, in business. They're not victim of the way they feel, their mood, the moment. They stop and they look. They survey the environment, and then they act in the best way that will serve what they're up to. So again, I encourage you to observe yourself. Start to look for where you use emotion irresponsibly, and start to chip away at that and become more responsible. This is the Escape the Drift podcast. I'm Dr. Jacob Egbert.